Honkai Star Rail version 2.4.
Are we in 2.4? I think we're in 2.4. It's right on the corner.
Point being is that we are now entering what I believe is Gen 2.5 of the characters. And to further elaborate that, basically you have the Gen 1 characters, so your Zila, your Jingyuin, your Luocha, so on and so forth. The characters that came out at the start of the game, they were adapted to and created around the start of Honkai Star Rail. And then eventually we got to a point where these characters became a little too powerful. Zila was the #1 character in the game for a long time. And then you had Jingyuin trying to creep up behind her. Of course, you had some characters like Kafka coming out and then pretty much outperforming Jingyuin in a number of ways, but then Jingyuin still had a way to find time for himself to show up. There's a number of different reasons as to what makes a Gen 1 character strong or weaker than the other characters, but the point being is that these characters were adapted to that time period. Then you get into Gen 1.5. Now this is arguable, to say the least. Gen 1.5 is basically the characters that are in between that. So if I'm not mistaken, that literally would be your Jingliu and Dill Pickle. Those are going to be the main two characters that I want to talk about. These characters borderline are Gen 2, but they're not exactly Gen 2 characters. There's still a lot of things about these characters that could make or break, right? They're just too good of a character to be considered Gen 1 because they blow it out of the water, which is why I say Dill Pickle and Jingliu. But they're not so good to be considered a Gen 2 character because they don't have a gimmick that really sets them apart from the rest of the roster. And so going into that, I can now explain to you guys about Gen 2 characters being like Black Swan, right? Black Swan is one of the characters, and even to a certain extent, Argenti. Argenti just missed damage. But here, let me show you guys exactly what I'm talking about, right? Black Swan is one of the characters that is outright just damage, right? You know, damage, support. Her kit overall is something that is blended wonderfully into the game so that you can see a lot of what this is. Now, I know I'm in the way of like the bottom part, but the gist of what you're looking at is Epiphany, okay, guys? So Epiphany is basically the big boom that she has, that she's going to be able to do from all of her stacks, right? All the little DOT things that she does, she's going to stack the DOT. This was unique to Black Swan. We already had damage over time in the game, but Black Swan took damage over time to another level. And even now, it's still not reaching its full potential. You still have a lot more that technically a character's kit like Black Swan could do, but we don't have the means to fully utilize that just yet. Obviously, there are ways that we can work around that, such as like a fast Kafka, right? 200 speed Kafka or 200 speed Swan. You can use Sparkle on top of Swan, try and get the stacks to be built up faster. And then I think Jack Huho, the guy coming out, he's going to be able to possibly help with Black Swan getting those stacks, but only time will tell once I actually get my hands on the character. As of right now, though, looking at all the characters that you have in the game, you start to notice a trend where these Gen 2 characters had something that made them very unique, but they were clearly designed around a particular team archetype in mind. Gallagher, Misha, let me kind of like fish around real quick to see what we have going on. Luca is one of those like in the middle, right? A Gen 1.5 / Gen 2 character. You had Dr. Ratio, again, in the middle, Gen 1.5 to Gen 2 character. Sparkle, even though she's hyper carry, she was definitely designed and geared for a certain or specific function compared to Bronya, who is a little bit more universal, so to speak, right? And I mean universal in the sense that you don't have to think as much when you're playing Bronya. You can just do. But when Sparkle is on the team, you definitely need to be more aware of action values in order to fully understand how to take advantage of that character. Harmony MC is a Gen 2 character. Of course, Gen 1.5 being Kafka, right? Topaz, another character that's like Gen 1.5. And honestly, I feel like Topaz might have been or could have been the start for Gen 2, but I'm not going to say that just yet for her. And then you have Robin being like this Gen 2, right? We are at this point in time where characters are too strong. And I'm not getting at like the power creep conversation, right? Like we can talk about that with Acheron, but I don't really think Acheron is necessarily power creep. What I'm explaining and what I think is happening here, I think the game is getting to a point where they've heard your concerns with Acheron, they've heard your concerns with Firefly, and they're trying to prevent this from happening with other characters. Now, again, this is just a theory. This is me speculating right now. I don't know anything. There's no like, this is the definitive data behind. No, this is just me talking. I think Acheron is a little too busted for what we had at the time. And every single character that comes out, whether they be for Acheron or, you know, significantly buffing her, we don't know, because Acheron doesn't have a complete team yet. And let me change that. not so much a complete team. Acheron doesn't have her team, the team that fully takes advantage of everything that Acheron wants to do and then like ascends her to the top, right? Keeps her in that broken territory. Acheron has amazing team options and she's got great team builds. But if I compared Acheron's team to Firefly, when we look at this and we're looking at what Firefly has to offer, you have Mei, which is your harmony support character. You have Firefly herself. You have Boot Hill, which 2 DPS characters, Hunt and Destruction, supporting one another and dishing out a crazy amount of damage and helping break all of the enemies very quickly. Mei is going to help them break that even further. She's increasing their break damage. And then of course you have Harmony MC being able to provide you with the super break. Now there's certain points where you won't be able to use Harmony MC because you might need a sustain. And then that's where you get something like Gallagher that comes into play, where Gallagher, being an abundance character who excels at breaking and enhances the break effect for him and his team whenever you have the besotted state, now you get into like, now I have an actual sustain, right? I have a full team. No matter how I spin it, I still have a full team. If I didn't want to use Boot Hill, you don't have to use Boot Hill, but they work so good together in terms of like destroying and shredding through enemies. There's probably no reason not to. And I don't want anyone to think like, oh, this is completely pay to win. No. I'm not saying this. Like there's no conversation to be had right now between whether or not something is pay to win or free to play. Right now, I'm just talking about what's happening in the game. If I were to move away from the Firefly team for just a moment, we could actually go into the fact that now you have Gen 2 characters and you have a what could be considered Gen 2 Honkai Star Rail. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that Honkai Star Rail is now entering the phase where enemies are designed with gimmicks in mind the same way that characters are designed with gimmicks in mind. I don't like the Android Juice Cup guy, right? The triple robots. I love them as an enemy, right? As a boss, but I don't like him. However, that doesn't mean it's a badly designed enemy. What's happening here is this enemy has different forms of DOT. He has different forms of debuffs. It's basically like you're fighting another team. And I think that's what's going to end up happening in the future, is that more of these enemies or boss designs are going to get to a point where it feels like you're not fighting a single character, but you're fighting a team. The new Argenti boss that we have, where he summons shields, and each one of these shields do a different thing, whether that be buffing him or debuffing you, doing a crap ton of damage to you at one time, such as like raining the shields on top of you, giving him shields, giving you shields if you take it out, doing damage to him if you take it out. It changes the way you prioritize fighting this particular boss. And so from a free-to-play perspective, there are some times where you have to use, you know, like your strongest attack to take out one of the shields because you'll die, or you have to use your shields on Aventurine and instead of like using up a skill point or saving a skill point, whatever the case may be. It alters the way that you play the game. And now we're at a point where you see these enemies only getting stronger and stronger. Apocalyptic Shadow is a great example of what could be in the future. Now, I'm not saying that Coco from Apocalyptic Shadow, although I would love Coco coming back, but I'm not saying that the Coco coming into the game is going to be one of those characters that we now see in MOC and like she's doing this crazy stuff. But I'm also not saying that couldn't happen. Does that make sense? All in all, we get to a point where Star Rail is evolving as a game. The characters aren't necessarily they're not necessarily weaker. I know that if we look at some of the characters compared to Acheron and Firefly, again, Jade, as disappointed as I am in Jade, let's look at Jade. By comparison, Jade is nowhere near on their level. There's no way you can make her on that level. And I understand that, you know, we could have some zero cycles, right? Like, oh, well, if I could zero cycle with the team, then technically they're just as strong. No. I think it's fair for us to establish that zero cycles are a great feat, but they don't necessarily create the agenda or push the narrative that a character is strong or not strong. I think we're able to look at a character's kit at this point and determine whether or not a character is strong or weaker than some of the other characters in the game. Right now, looking at the Gen 2 roster, which let me see here. What are we considering Gen 2 characters? Firefly, Boot Hill, Harmony MC, Robin, Yunli, which is going to be out by the time you watch this video. You also have, actually that might be it, Acheron is a Gen 2 character to a certain extent. Black Swan is a Gen 2 character. Sparkle is a Gen 2 character. And Jade is a Gen 2 character. Oh, and then Aventurine as well. All of these characters, at least from the 5-star standards, right? If I were to go into the 4 stars, like I said, we have Misha, we have Gallagher. Would that be it? And then we have the new March 7th. All of these characters have something in common, which is pretty much that they're designed to do 1 or 2 things in particular, and then they excel at doing that thing, and they have a multitude of other options that they could do. Aventurine had a lot of controversy, I guess, around him whenever he released, because it was like, oh, do you run full defense, or like what's the crit rate, or what's the crit damage in his kit for? How do you run him? Why would you run him this way when you could do that way? Blah 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 blah. Put this orb on him instead of that orb. Put this rope on him instead of that rope. It became to a point where you could run Aventurine pretty much however you wanted to. My Aventurine is fully decked out as a sub DPS character, and he still meets the 3,500 to 4,000 defense range after being in battle. I'm chilling. As long as he keeps the team alive, that's all I care for. Aventurine on field, team no die, and that's fine. But if you look at it from somebody else's perspective, and maybe they don't have access to doing that, they don't have his light cone, or a light cone that benefits his damage, well, you might as well just run maximum defense. Regardless of how you spin it, he's going to keep the team alive. Now, what doesn't happen is you have Fu Xuan, and as much as I love Fu Xuan does not have the capability of doing what Aventurine does. She's going to keep the team alive, absolutely. She's going to give you some buffs with the crit rate buff, absolutely. But she doesn't have the capability of doing the same damage output that Aventurine does. So it's not being able to use her in the same way that you could use him. I hope that makes sense. Blade was another character that was going to be in like the Gen 1.5 discussion, and I feel like if they made a better version of Blade, maybe, but then they would have to get more unique, because he was a little, at that time he was great. Right now he's just falling off, and that's kind of another thing that I want to talk about here. Jingliu, this goes into the power creep discussion that I want to have. I don't think power creep is here because the characters are outright stronger. I think I mentioned that earlier. I think the whatever definition of power creep that you're comfortable using, it's not because of the characters. I think it's the game itself. The game has evolved from Gen 1 to 2.0. We are now in, I know that sounds like crazy to think about, right? Like, trust me, I get it, because the game goes from 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Like, it, you would think that it's common sense, and it technically is, but the way that it's evolved is stopping the characters. Jingliu isn't a bad character. Her kit on paper is still one of the best kits in the game. Her damage output on paper is still some of the best in the game, but she can't keep up at this current point in time with what's happening. There's so many off element characters or enemies or bosses in the game now that Jingliu cannot, she just can no longer brute force her way. Did I say that right? She can no longer brute force her way through the game. It takes so much more work for her to brute force something than it would for a character like, and this is why I love her, Zila. In order for Zila to brute force something, it doesn't take as much work as a lot of players think. It just takes hyper investment. But now it's getting to a point where you have to start hyper investing in your Jingliu. You can no longer have a mediocre Jingliu do more or the same damage as your Gen 1 Zila. You can no longer have a mediocre Dill Pickle doing the same damage as your Gen 1 mediocre Zila, whatever the case may be, right? Now you have to invest into Dill Pickle and Jingliu the same way that somebody would have had to invest into Zila. So it still shows you that these characters are very strong, but the game is stopping them or attempting to stop them, right? Because now this is their way of phasing out those characters, so that you have to pull for, let's say they release Jingliu's mom or something like that, I don't know. Now you have more inclination to pull for Jingliu's mom. Let's say they release, you know, the original Daniel, the original Imbiber de Lune, right? And he's significantly stronger, but has the same exact kit, just slightly more gimmicky. Now you have an incentive to pull for the new Imbiber de Lune instead of using the older Imbiber de Lune. I think that form of power creep is possibly happening in Star Rail, but I don't think it's happening that specific, right? We're seeing different characters. Clara, where's she at? Baby girl Clara is supposed to be the counter character in the game, right? Counter, boom, do follow up, repulsor blast, yeah? And now we have Yunli literally right next to each other, bro. That's crazy. Now you have Yunli, both characters, super short, tiny girls with big ass weapons or a robot that protects them in the back, right? Their game plan is the same, but the way you play Yunli is much more interactive. You have to like be aware of what's happening. It's not like a full auto, fume. And by no means is this me saying that you need to pull Yunli, right? Regardless if you have Clara or not. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I am getting at is that Yunli's kit is designed to be insanely strong but limiting in how you play this character. Yunli's damage potential is easily what, tier 0.5? If I'm thinking of a tier off the top of my head, her damage potential is easily tier 0.5. Having Argenti's gimmick, which is the double ultimate, but not being limited on damage because of not having, you know, like you stack up one ultimate, then you stack up another, and now you have the full ultimate damage. No, she gets her full ultimate damage from being hit. So you get hit, she does ult, boom, 400k, just like that. There's a lot that goes into that, and you get 2 of them. This is another form of them telling you, the devs, right? The devs showing you, hey, play this character, or like maybe think about playing this character this way. We've done things like that with snapshotting before, with Zila, for instance, right? Or even Ratio and Topaz, where you do their ultimate or something. Usually the ultimate is the only free thing you can do. You do it in between their little action bar. They have one action, then another action like catacornered right next to it, right? You do an action in between that, and that's called snapshotting. At least that's what I'm familiar with for snapshotting the ultimate in between stuff. But now with Yunli, well, I'm gonna use my ult, and then you're gonna attack me. I'm gonna get 400k. Then I'm gonna use my ult immediately after that. You're gonna attack me again, and I'm gonna get another 400k, right? There's no limit to it. The limit is, do I have energy or not? Do I have ult? Yes. Okay, you die. I don't have ult. Okay, you get to live another turn. That is power in itself. This character is cracked, and I only see more characters coming out like that. Even Robin, we can talk about Robin for a little bit too. Robin is a Gen 2 character. Robin has advanced forward, just like Bronya, just like Sparkle, but the way she advances you forward, being able to buff the entire team, it's like they took half of Ruan Mei and then half of Bronya, and then bam, slap them into one, right? And that's great for a number of reasons. Even on a Yunli team, who you would think Yunli wants to get hit, which she does, and that gives her a whole different opportunity to work. I've already seen pure fiction runs from Creator Access server with players running a 3-man team or even a 2-man team. I've seen people doubling down on the Yunli just to get her hit so that she just keeps swinging the sword at them, right? Because the damage itself just eventually stacks up. You start doing 50k a swing and you got hit, what, 4 or 5 times in a single turn? Okay, yeah, that's a lot of damage, and you're getting your energy back every time you get hit. You have energy for your ult. Whenever the phase goes away, you can force the ult. Oh my god, there's so many different things that Yunli can do, dude. It's ridiculous. But ultimately, that's where we are. I think it's more important for you guys, if you care about Gen 2, and this just a little tidbit of advice. If you don't have Acheron and you skipped Firefly for whatever reason, I think it's way more important that now you pick a Gen 2 DPS. It doesn't mean that you have to stop using your Jingliu, your Jingyuan, your Kafka, or even your Dill Pickle. But I do think that now is a very critical time, especially knowing what we could have in the future as far as characters go. Pick a Gen 2 DPS and then build a team around that character so that you can fully take advantage of what's happening in the game right now. Because the game is only going to get, I don't want to even use the term harder, but it's going to evolve further. And the characters have to be able to keep up with that. If the characters, because they don't get buffs, right? Characters don't get buffed. The reason that we feel like Jingliu or Zila or Kafka or whoever are weaker isn't because they magically got weaker. It's because characters keep increasing in difficulty. The enemies keep increasing in HP, resistances, damages they do, gimmicks of their own. They're playing like an actual team now, or they're coming in pairs as a team. There's so many different reasons to what's going on here that old characters can't keep up because there's no buff for them. The biggest buff they can get is a brand new character, right? Another support character or something like that, or a new relic set. And that only goes so far. We've seen that time and time again with characters like Jingyuan. Even with the Super Break Jingyuan, that's a great DPS, right? Like Super Break Jingyuan is awesome, but it's not enough to be able to say, yeah, pull Jingyuan, don't pull Yunli, don't pull Firefly, don't pull Acheron, and you're good to go. So he still needs more, and that just, it is what it is, right? Blade, great kid on paper, but there's no fixing this character at this point. Jade was the closest thing to getting to helping that character perform at a very high level, and I just don't think it's happening anytime soon. But that's gonna be it for me today, guys. I just wanted to go over that and kind of like get my thoughts out. I haven't been on Star Rail in a minute. I'm gonna be honest with y'all. I've tried to keep up with it, not to say that I quit, of course, but I've tried to keep up with it as far as watching my homies making the content, keeping up with conversations in my Discord. Join my Discord if you want. And a lot of what's happening is pretty much stuff that I kind of called out a few patches ago, and now it's really starting to come to light. But I think it's a very slow, gradual thing that you could actually prepare for. Now, of course, if you were preparing for this before, it's way easier. You're not going to feel it at all. But if this is something that's catching you like immediately, even especially if like you're a newer players have it easier. But you know, if this is something catching you immediately and you're like, dang, I wasn't prepared for this, like, yo, this is power creep, whatever. Again, now is the best time for you to start looking at a Gen 2 DPS. And who knows, man, maybe they'll rerun Acheron sooner than we think. I don't know, but that would be another great time for you to kind of pick and choose what you want to do. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down below on how you feel about the meta direction or the new direction of this Honkai Star Rail, the Gen 2 characters, whatever the case may be. I can't say my usual outro because it's inappropriate for YouTube. Like, subscribe, like the video, comment, subscribe. That's the way that I say that. Smell you later.